An emergency at a nuclear waste storage site in Washington state. The Sanhedrin revives a 2,500-year-old temple ritual in Jerusalem, and America's embassy to Israel will stay in Tel Aviv, at least for now. It's SkyWatch TV for Wednesday, May 10th, 2017. I'm Derek Gilbert. First up, the big story, of course, President Trump, at the request of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, fired FBI Director James Comey Tuesday. This is big. FBI directors don't get fired very often. Surprised Washington sent it into a spin of, spin. Even though Comey wasn't popular with either party, both parties are trying to make political hay out of this. Republicans were angry that he never recommended prosecution of Hillary Clinton for her illegal use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. Democrats still blame Comey for costing Hillary Clinton the White House when he released to Congress the weekend before Election Day a letter reminding Congress that the FBI was sort of still looking at Hillary's email issue. Still, Democrats today are trying to spin it as President Trump spiking, or trying to, an investigation into Russian influence on him personally and his political campaign. Just for fun today, tune in any of the major cable news networks. Watch how many times they use the word Russia. Democrats also calling this Nixonian. This is a reference to the 1973 Saturday Night Massacre, when President Richard Nixon fired the special prosecutor investigating a break-in at Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate Hotel, from which we get the suffix "gate" attached to every bit of public malfeasance ever for the last 43 years. Can we stop saying "gate" for every scandal? Anyway, the Nixon Library amusingly tweeted a response out. Fun fact, President Nixon never fired an FBI director, #not Nixonian. The only FBI director ever fired by a president was in 1993, when Director William Sessions was fired by President Bill Clinton, ironically. So to be perfectly accurate, we can say that firing an FBI director is Clintonian, not Nixonian. Now, to be fair, Mr. Sessions had been under investigation since the end of the George H.W. Bush administration, apparently for misuse of public funds. He didn't pay taxes on use of an FBI limousine to get back and forth to work. He billed the country for travel that apparently was to visit relatives. But it's possible that Sessions was only doing what prior directors had done and gotten away with, and that he thought he was entitled to. I don't know, have not looked into it deeply. I only bring it up because politically motivated firings are not outside the realm of possibility when you're talking about the Clintons. So, Tucker Carlson on Fox News, his program, Tucker Carlson Tonight, that is, was broadcast just a few hours after the news of the firing went public. And he said what makes the most sense to me about all this. Set aside all of the spin from left and right. Carlson said, and I quote, "Several Democratic senators have already and predictably called the firing Nixonian, as if you were watching something from during Watergate, but you are not. This firing was overdue, and everyone in Washington knows it." Comey repeatedly injected himself into political matters that the country's chief investigative figure should stay out of. Comey was too eccentric to run the FBI and too powerful for any of us to breathe easily while he was there. Just how powerful was James Comey? Let's put it this way. He was feared in a way that no appointed bureaucrat should ever be feared in a free society. Time and again, elected lawmakers on both sides came on this show and expressed worry and concern about his behavior. But they did so only during commercial breaks with the cameras off. Why? They were terrified of the prospect of criticizing him in public. End quote. Carlson makes an excellent point. Dictatorship by unelected officials, whether director of the FBI, agents for the Internal Revenue Service, or justices on the Supreme Court, is the real threat to our freedom in this representative republic and should never, ever be tolerated. But again, we'll see just how hypocritical the never-Trumpers are willing to be in the next few days as they completely reverse direction of their public opinion of former FBI Director James Comey. Now, there's one bit of humor in all this, and I'm going to shamelessly steal a meme that I saw on Facebook this morning. quick. Well, there's no director of the FBI. It's time to duplicate, make copies of all of those old VHS movies. Coincidentally, by the way, President Trump today going to meet with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. What timing? Predictably, progressive pundits are already calling Lavrov his case officer, as if President Trump was just an agent of Russian intelligence. Does nobody remember that on Monday, Barack Obama's director of national intelligence, James Clapper, testified to Congress that he had seen no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government? The same thing he told Chuck Todd of NBC News on Meet the Press back in March. No evidence of collusion. Does Mr. Trump need to lob more cruise missiles at another base in Syria to make the point? In other news, officials declared an emergency at a nuclear waste storage site in Washington state Tuesday. A portion of a tunnel that contains rail cars filled with radioactive waste collapsed. Officials say there was no release of radiation, nobody was injured, no workers in the tunnel at the time. This was at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in southeastern Washington. Other workers at Hanford close to the site were evacuated. Those further away were told to remain indoors. The accident occurred at a facility called Purex in the middle of the Hanford site. It's about 200 miles southeast of Seattle. It's big, about half the size of Rhode Island. For decades, Hanford made plutonium for American nuclear weapons, including the bomb dropped on Nagasaki at the end of World War II. The Islamic State has beheaded a high-ranking Russian intelligence officer. ISIS published to Twitter an 11-minute video clip showing the beheading Tuesday. The release was timed to match Russia's Victory Day celebration. It commemorates their victory over the Nazis in World War II. The victim was identified in the clip as Colonel Evgeny Petrenko. No response yet from Moscow. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met with Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah in Istanbul Monday night to discuss ways to halt what he called the Judaization of Jerusalem. Earlier in the day, Israel rebuked Erdogan for a speech in which he called Israel racist and discriminatory and called on Muslims to flood the Temple Mount in support of the Palestinian cause. Israeli and American Air Force pilots getting ready for a joint exercise this week over the Arabah Desert. That is in southern Israel, north of the port city of Eilat. Several U.S. Air Force F-15s already in country getting ready for the exercise. The drill will take place at the Israeli Air Force Avda Air Base. And the U.S. Embassy to Israel will stay in Tel Aviv, at least for now. Senior U.S. sources said President Trump's already decided to extend the order, which prevents the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem from being transferred from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. A U.S. source said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had already been notified of Trump's decision. Both governments agreed, according to this report, that this would not be the best time to move the embassy. U.S. officials said that Israel didn't want to deal with the fallout from this issue right now, had requested that Trump delay the move. However, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Wednesday, the Prime Minister's office had not received any notice about a decision by the U.S. government to delay, to move or not move the U.S. embassy, and that Israel's stance is that all the embassies belong in Israel's capital, Jerusalem, and the U.S. embassy should be one of the first to move. We'll keep our eyes on this one. Coming up, wildfires force mandatory evacuations in the American South. That's next on SkyWatch TV.
I was hired by the government of Sardar to dig up the skeletons of giants. We always carried the bones and the artifacts we found into the church.
So they would make the skeletons disappear. And the church was always involved because they didn't want people talking.
So we asked the priest, what are we supposed to do with the skeleton? And he said, break it into pieces and bury it under the foundation of the house.
I personally excavated 2 skeletons that were more than 10 feet tall.
What happened with the Anasazi? A portal opened, a doorway, and the giants came up out of the earth.
It's almost like they were eaten on the run. This was the violent overthrow of the Anasazi.
Tens of thousands of artifacts were carted off to the Smithsonian's repositories, including the bones of the giants.
At the turn of the 19th century, bodies of giants were turning up all over the United States. All over the island of Sardinia, there are massive stone sepulchres famed since time immemorial as tombs of the giants. Everywhere the megalithic towers stood, the tombs of the giants were close by. There may be tens of thousands of giants still buried in the soils of Sardinia today.
Giants are going to return to the earth, are going to rise from the dead.
There is a multi-billion-dollar black market for extractable DNA from the tissue and the bones of dead giants. The stage is now set for mankind to bring about the reemergence of the Rephaim. The enemies of God are about to become the architects of their own divine judgment.
A fast-moving wildfire is spreading and has burned over 140,000 acres on the Georgia-Florida border. Most of the fire has been confined to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, but surrounding communities have been told to evacuate since Sunday. Nearly 700 people now fighting the blaze, which is being pushed toward the southeast by strong wind gusts and fueled by dry air. The fire picked up 4,000 acres on Sunday alone, was only about 12% contained at that time. A new climate warning, but this time for global cooling instead of warming. A new study shows that the Antarctic is cooling, and I know polar bears live at the Arctic, but it conveys the sense that the Antarctic is cooling and that the previous warming shown in the second half of the 20th century was an extreme case. The study was published in the journal Science of the Total Environment in February. Climate change skeptics now picking up on this and evaluating the information, but evidence shows that total ice accumulation on Antarctica is outweighing losses. This claim was actually supported by NASA, which did a study in 2015 and found that an increase in Antarctic snow accumulation that began 10,000 years ago is adding enough ice to the continent to outweigh the increased losses from thinning glaciers. And a reassessment of climate data from the Antarctic shows a cooling trend, not warming, a cooling trend that began in 1988, 1999, which is already impacting the layer of the cryosphere. That's the frozen water, snow, ice. A warning from the Centers for Disease Control of a far deadlier tick-borne disease than Lyme disease. This new disease kills about 10% of its victims and permanently disables another 50%. It's called Powassan, or POW for short. It's also carried, like Lyme disease by deer ticks. Recent cases have popped up in the northeastern U.S. and around the Great Lakes. The virus causes inflammation of the brain, which leads to death in 10% of the cases and permanent disability in 50%. The danger of Powassan, say experts, is that unlike Lyme disease, where a tick may have to remain on its host for up to 24 hours or more before it transmits the virus, Powassan can be passed from the tick to a human host in 15 minutes. Reduce your risk if you're going to be outside. Use tick repellent, wear long sleeves and pants. Check yourself when you come in from outside. Avoid bushy and wooded areas. Another animal story, shark attacks on the increase, shark sightings as well along the California coast. One breached near surfers off the California coast earlier this week. Most of these sharks are young great whites, some 6 feet long, just a year old, this according to a marine biologist who says that they've made a comeback in the last 20 years because of conservation efforts. The water is cleaner, it's healthier, the food source for the sharks is returning, and so are the sharks. Unfortunately, the sharks seem to confuse human swimmers and surfers for their natural food source, including 35-year-old Leanne Erickson, who was attacked in knee-deep water north of San Diego last week. She's had 2 surgeries already on her injured leg and expects 2 more before she'll be released from the hospital. A jury in Nicaragua found an evangelical pastor and 4 members of his congregation guilty of homicide after the death of a 25-year-old woman who was allegedly stripped naked and left to burn for 5 hours as part of an exorcism ritual. The Associated Press reports that Pastor Juan Gregorio Rocha Romero, who leads a church in a remote village in Nicaragua, was found guilty of killing Vilma Trujillo Garcia, who was burned over 80% of her body before she died in February. Prosecutors are seeking a sentence of up to 36 years, which is more than the maximum of 30 years allowed under Nicaraguan law. And finally, on the day after the Feast of Shavuot, and Hebrew speakers, please forgive my pronunciation, that's the Feast of Weeks, June 2nd, the specific date on the calendar, the Sanhedrin, which has been reconstituted in Israel, will reenact a ceremony officially establishing the borders of Jerusalem for the purposes of reinstating temple sacrifices. This was last performed by Nehemiah in the 6th century BC, after the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem by the Persian king Cyrus. Today, this ritual is a powerful political statement. Basically, the third temple is coming whether you like it or not. Rabbi Hillel Weiss, spokesman for the Sanhedrin, said that establishing these borders is possibly the final step to reinstating the temple service, noting that just after Nehemiah performed this ritual, the sacrifices started up again. The only thing lacking today for the sacrifices, says Rabbi Weiss, is the altar, and when that's ready, we will need to have these borders firmly established. So in 3 weeks, the day after the Feast of Shavuot, the Sanhedrin will mark points along the border and attempt to walk as much of it as possible. They're still waiting on permission from the police, and in the past, things like this involving rebuilding the temple or building the new temple have been blocked by police. Obviously, this is highly charged politically, which is putting it nicely. The Sanhedrin is also still deliberating on exactly where those borders should go, but they do say that they will be substantially larger than they were during the days of Nehemiah. Tomorrow, Sharon will be the special guest on a video interview. This is the Watchman's Report, hosted by Mike Kerr of Hear the Watchman. You might remember we spoke at the Hear the Watchman conference in Dallas in, 6 weeks ago? And we'll be speaking at the Hear the Watchman Idaho conference coming up in August. This program is called, Hear the Watchman, the Watchman's Report. The YouTube channel is Hear the Watchman's Journey. This will be broadcast live as a live YouTube interview tomorrow, Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. That's UTC -6. But if you don't catch it live, you can watch it on YouTube after the fact. It will be archived there, and you'll find a link to that at the SkyWatch TV Facebook page afterwards. Of course, you can find all of our stuff online at skywatchtv.com and our web-exclusive content, not only at skywatchtv.com, but the SkyWatch TV channel on Roku, the SkyWatch TV channel on YouTube, of course, and the new SkyWatch TV app for Apple TV. You'll find all the things I post, including links to the videos that I've been releasing, little 5 to 8 minute video clips on topics covered in my book, The Great Inception. You'll find that at DerekPGilbert.com. Thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV. Pay taxes on use of an FBI limousine to get back and forth to work. He billed the country for travel that apparently was to visit relatives. But it's possible that Sessions was only doing what prior directors had done and gotten away with, and that he thought he was entitled to. I don't know, have not looked into it deeply. I only bring it up because politically motivated firings are not outside the realm of possibility when you're talking about the Clintons. So, Tucker Carlson on Fox News, his program, Tucker Carlson Tonight, that is, was broadcast just a few hours after the news of the firing went public. And he said what makes the most sense. An emergency at a nuclear waste storage site in Washington State. The Sanhedrin revives a 2,500-year-old temple ritual in Jerusalem, and America's embassy to Israel will stay in Tel Aviv, at least for now. It's SkyWatch TV for Wednesday, May 10th, 2017. I'm Derek Gilbert. First up, the big story, of course, President Trump, at the request of Attorney General Jeff Sessions, fired FBI Director James Comey Tuesday. This is big. FBI directors don't get fired very often. Surprised Washington's library amusingly tweeted a response out. Fun fact, President Nixon never fired an FBI director, hashtag not Nixonian. The only FBI director ever fired by a president was in 1993 when Director William Sessions was fired by President Bill Clinton, ironically. So to be perfectly accurate, we can say that firing an FBI director is Clintonian, not Nixonian. Now, to be fair, Mr. Sessions had been under investigation since the end of the George H.W. Bush administration, apparently for misuse of public funds. He didn't send it into a spin of, spin. Even though Comey wasn't popular with either party, both parties are trying to make political hay out of this. Republicans were angry that he never recommended prosecution of Hillary Clinton for her illegal use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. Democrats still blame Comey for costing Hillary Clinton the White House when he released to Congress the weekend before Election Day a letter reminding Congress that the FBI was sorta still looking at Hillary's email issue. Still, Democrats today are trying to spin it as President Trump spiking, or trying to, an investigation into Russian influence on him personally and his political campaign. Just for fun today, tune in any of the major cable news networks. Watch how many times they use the word Russia. Democrats also calling this Nixonian. This is a reference to the 1973 Saturday Night Massacre, when President Richard Nixon fired the special prosecutor investigating a break-in at Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate Hotel, from which we get the suffix "gate" attached to every bit of public malfeasance ever for the last 43 years. Can we stop saying "gate" for every scandal? Anyway, the Nixon